to the History Slam podcast from Activehistory.ca. Here's your host, Sean Graham.
Thank you, Adam. Welcome to the History Slam, everybody. I am Sean Graham, coming at you today nearly live from Vancouver, British Columbia, out here on the left coast for Congress 2019 and the Canadian Historical Association annual meeting. Getting ready to participate in a couple of panels later in the week, but more importantly than what I'm going to be doing later in the week, it is, of course, the 75th anniversary of D-Day coming up on Thursday, June the 6th. And news coverage is all over the place about this. And it started, I just watched a story on the French language news out here in Vancouver. And they were talking to some veterans who were very open about the fact that this is the last major milestone anniversary of D-Day that will include veterans. You know, if you're looking forward in 5 years, yeah, there will probably be some left. But, 80 doesn't quite have the same place in the imagination as 75th. And if you're looking forward to the 100th in 25 years, of course, there will be no Second World War veterans left at that point. And it really starts to get you thinking about things about living memory and living histories and the importance now of documenting the stories while we can and learning about what these individuals went through and what they experienced so that we have these stories and that we don't lose the memory of what happened over time, right? And with the tools that we have available to us now, it maybe makes it easier to document these things, but certainly, being proactive about getting these stories, it's certainly a priority for a lot of folks. And it has led to a wonderful new documentary that is premiering on Saturday, June the 8th, across the country on Global, called D-Day in 14 Stories. And just as the title suggests, it's telling the story of D-Day through 14 individuals and what those experiences were like. So do check your local listings across the country for D-Day in 14 Stories. And for our international friends, just go online, Google D-Day in 14 Stories, and you will have a chance to see how you can get that wherever you are listening to the show. And as we look ahead to about what D-Day 75 is going to mean, huge crowds over there at the Juno Beach Center. I was talking to somebody when I was over there in France back in April, and they're expecting huge crowds for the 75th on Thursday. Certainly at Omaha Beach and pretty much everywhere along the coast there's going to be significant crowds for what happens in terms of the commemorations, because D-Day holds such a place in the public imagination of the Second World War. And the significance of D-Day, it's really hard to overstate, militarily and obviously in the memory of it. It just is such a powerful moment in how we remember the Second World War. And I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to talk to one of the veterans who participated in the D-Day landings, Jim Parks, who's a veteran who is featured in the documentary D-Day in 14 Stories. I had the absolute honor of speaking to him last week over the phone, and we had to do this in two different segments. And I've been going back and forth on how to present this. We're going to do it straight through as I spoke to Mr. Parks. It's not necessarily in a chronological order of what his experience was, but I didn't want to cut anything or rearrange anything from this. I wanted everybody to experience the conversation that I had with him in the order in which we talked about it. He was incredibly generous with his time. I was amazed by his memory, and I probably shouldn't have been as amazed by his memory as I was, but he was very open about his experience. As I say, he's featured in the documentary as well. But we start by talking about D-Day, then we go back, talk a little bit about his enlistment experience, why he wanted to enlist. He was underage when he enlisted. So we talk about that. And then at about the 34 minute mark, the phone went out, and we just got disconnected, and we could not get connected again. So I'll come back and explain a little bit about what happened. But this is a conversation that took place in 2 parts. But I really didn't want to edit anything too hard on this. I wanted to allow the story that Mr. Parks told me and his experience. I wanted to give everybody the opportunity to hear it the way he told it. And I didn't want to edit it in a way that could potentially take away from how he told his story. So that's why I didn't go through and edit anything or rearrange it to make it in chronological order. This is just how the conversations went. So without any further ado, here is my conversation with Second World War veteran Jim Parks. Well, Mr. Parks, to get started, I'm just curious if you could just sort of start off by explaining what your role was on D-Day.
I was with the Mortar platoon of the Winnipeg Rifles, and our role was to go in at H-2, which is 2 minutes before the landing craft with the infantry companies. Mm-hmm. And the landing craft tank that we were on had 2 armored bulldozers in the front with the engineers, and they had ropes attached to the armored bulldozers with big hooks at the end, and their job was to go in and to hook hook onto these big obstacles in the water and drag them out, and that would make way for the landing craft to come in. They wouldn't have obstacles to hit. But of course that didn't happen because timing was off, and our boat was hit, and I think the infantry were a bit later than they should have been, and so we all ended up being there mixed up about the same time.
So when that happened, and there's the logistical mix-up there, what's happening in your head? How do you figure out where to go, what to do? Sort of what is your mindset there?
Well, we still had to try to get to the shore, and the bulldozers themselves, they get off, and they managed to do something like that. We didn't exactly watch what they did once they got going, because we were just concerned with us getting off the boat. But the water was too deep for us, because and the boat had been hit and had trouble with the landing, with the ramp, because in the front where the sailor rolled it down, that's the part that was the boat was hit. And when they dropped us off, the water was too deep, and so our carrier just sank. Period. It was about 10 feet of water, 8 to 10 feet of water at least, and the water was pretty rough too. Mm-hmm. The closer you get to the shore, the more turbulent it is. A bit of waves and so on. So we end up swimming in. I got sideswiped on the way in by one of the landing craft coming in. It brushed my shoulder on the left, because I didn't know that. All I was concerned about is getting in the shore, because it was fairly, I couldn't touch bottom,
Right.
And so I kept going, and there's one of these big obstacles in the water. I grabbed hold of that to catch my breath, because I'd swallowed a bit of water when I got that sideswipe, and I finally got into shore, and the landing craft had landed, and the people had got off, but some of the people had been shot up, and so some were lying on the sand, and I didn't know they're just lying for protection or what, but it turns out the ones that are lying on the sand were the ones that were hit, because I popped beside one, and I knew the guy was a corporal called Scape from Saskatchewan, and I said to him, I said something, whatever I said, but he was being badly wounded, and he wasn't talking. Then it ended up later on, we found that he died of wounds that they showed on the list. But I just since I lost all my stuff, I grabbed this Sten gun, and I unhooked his web belt and got the small pack off,
Right.
And I made my way over to the pillbox and waited for the rest of the ones of my group come in, because we were supposed to come in with our mortar carriers and set up and pop in a few smoke bombs and so on. But of course, having lost the carriers sunk in the water, we swam and we lost our mortars and all. So that was our little setback for the day, for that part of the day anyway.
Right. So did you know where to go specifically? Like, had you been trained or been shown photographs and maps and these sorts of things, so you knew? Like, did you have a rendezvous point that you were trying to get to once, you had to swim in?
Yeah, we actually landed in the spot we were supposed to land.
Okay.
Yeah, well, there's a series of about 5 or 6 pillboxes in a row. There's a Sewell's River, which was on the sort of split the difference between the Regina rifles on the left of it, and we were to the right of it. And immediately to the right of the Sewell's River was the B Company, which we were attached to. And that's where I landed. And there's a series of pillboxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right along there. And I was right by number 2 pillboxes and we landed. That's where we're supposed to land, and that's where we were. So we pretty accurate in the area we were supposed to land.
So once you get there and you're on the beach, what is the feeling like? Is it just? Can you describe that at all? With people around you, as you said, a guy you knew who had been injured and was wounded on the ground, who you saw. Like, what is that experience like?
Well, it was a scramble because until I got to the beach, I had nothing left. The swimming in, we lost our carrier. We were supposed to come in with the carriers. We all landed there. Everything was supposed to be bombed and shelled out, no opposition. But it turned out that everything was still there and still operating because a lot of the boys in the company were shot up. I think we lost about 131 or 132 on the beach. Actually killed on the beach,
Mm-hmm.
But quite a few wounded altogether, over 200 altogether, including the killed. So, and then the rest got through. So I was on when I got onto the beach. That's as far as I got on the beach because normally once we got on the beach we're supposed to set up mortars and we were ready to move inland. But following that, the rest of our platoon would be coming in with the rest of the mortars, and they did come in. They were supposed to be about 5 or 6 minutes later, and I couldn't tell you exact what time, but they landed right where they should have landed, and we were all landed in the places we were supposed to be. We weren't drifted off to one side or another. It was pretty accurate where we were supposed to go, and that's where you ended up being,
So when you get to the beach and the other group is there, so what happens then? So you're laying the mortars down?
We didn't, like I said, the mortars we had, we lost them.
Right.
Our boat was hit, and we were far enough out when they dropped our mortars off, our carriers off. We sank. Mortars and all, the carriers and everything all went underwater, and we had to swim in. So we had no mortars, no carriers, no nothing.
Right. But did the group behind you that you're saying that they landed where they were, did they have their mortars?
Yeah, they did. The other 2 sections, they were okay. They got all the wind because they weren't. They didn't hit anything. We got hit a mine and something hit the front. Could have been a shell hit the front because it fouled up the landing, the ramp,
Right.
But the ramp, even though the ramp was there, the water was too deep. Once it went off, the first carrier went off and it sort of floated a bit. Then it sort of gradually sank, and the fellows jumped off and started to make way in the shore and grabbed onto boxes or whatever was floating and got in. Because I was able to swim a bit and got sideswiped on the way in.
So were you injured by that? Like severely injured by that?
No, that wasn't injured. Just that I could have drowned because when I got sideswiped, it pushed me under the water, and I swallowed. You sort of see stars, and you lose your breath, and I swallowed a lot of water, and it's I guess the feeling would be panic feeling, and you get up and I sort of swam in the shore. It was pretty rough, Yeah. When I say I swam, it wasn't just like a leisurely swim. It was sort of a scrambly thing. I got to get in there. And gradually I could feel my feet touch the sand below, and then I sort of waded and pushed my way in that way, because it was still chest deep.
Right.
And still a water, still the waves coming in. It seemed to me it was kind of rough coming in, the waves.
And was it difficult once you got to the beach even to walk? I imagine with all the with everything being wet, it would have been quite heavy and difficult to move around.
I never thought about being wet. Or they said, was it cold? I said, I don't remember being cold or wet. I just got to the beach, and then I plopped down beside that Corporal Scaife. He'd been one of the rifle companies, but he'd been mortally wounded. That's when I got his stem gun and undid a small pack, because he didn't need that anymore.
So how long?
I made it over to the pillbox, and a few of us scattered by the pillbox. We waited there. We knew our rest of our group would be coming in, and what they did is there's Bob Hussey and I were from our section, and our driver for the carrier, he ended up combo box is a food box, but it floated. He grabbed onto that, and he got picked up by the Navy, and he came back a day or two later. He joined us 2-3 later. We didn't have any mortars. We had no carrier, and we had nothing. So they spread us among the other two sections. The section would be two mortars, right? 2 carriers.
Right.
We had 6 altogether, and our 2 we lost.
Right.
Yeah.
So how long were you on the beach then? Once you had the gun and you got to the pillbox, how long were you on?
I couldn't tell you the exact time, but we weren't there very long. And because our platoon commander come in, and then there was what you call a tactical headquarters of our brigade come in, and there's a sergeant major who's normally a sergeant major with us, but he was assigned to the brigade headquarters, and they since I was available, they needed a runner, so I was assigned to him to do some running. You know what a runner does? He runs messages, right?
Yeah.
The only thing is, I lasted about an hour and I got sick because I swallowed a lot of that water.
Right.
And the sergeant major, I knew him anyway from Winnipeg. He was a Winnipeg policeman, and he used to be in our area, and he was also in our unit a long time. And he just said, they used to call me Parksy. He says, well, you get over there, and he said, just see what you have to do. And I brought up a lot of seawater, and he said, rejoin the platoon. So as soon as I felt better, I looked around for him, and I found our group, and I was assigned to one of the other mortars, an extra person. So we ended up with about 6 extra people were spread among the other 2 sections.
And so, and those were guys who you had been with before, and so you were all just sort of divided up amongst other mortar groups?
Yeah. But then they assigned. But then they needed somebody. That's when at the same time they needed somebody for a runner, and that's when I got assigned. They said Parksy, report to Sergeant. I know his name will come back to me in a minute. And so I went back to him, and that's when I did the running, and I got that sick and brought the seawater, and he said rejoin my platoon, which I did. I found them, and I just hopped on the back stayed with them for the rest of the day. In fact, I stayed with them the next 2-3 days. We never got any mortars equipment back for about at least a week or so.
Okay, so at the end of the day, then, as you say, you were with these guys for the next couple of days. So
yeah.
How did you know at the time what the events of that day meant in the larger scope of the war? Were you conscious of that?
Well, not at the time. We knew we were part of the big part. We knew there was a big taking a lot of the shore, and we knew there was the 8th Brigade was over on our left, and the 7th Brigade we were here, and we knew the Regina was on our left. We knew the overall picture. We knew pretty good because we had what they call exercises, and they showed a sand table, and they didn't actually have names. They had fictitious names for the targets. They had orange and apple. They had it all orange, apple, peach, and that sort of thing for the names of the locations.
Uh-huh.
In order because for security reasons.
Right.
We didn't know those until we got on the boat. And we knew we were going to France. We knew we were going to France anyway, but we didn't know where. Then they give us 10 francs and money, which they didn't give them to me because it's deducted from your pay, of course, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't be free, and so they gave us that. So I ended up that was in my pocket, so that was okay.
Yeah. So were you able to spend that money?
I can't remember. A lot of stuff we got there didn't have to buy anything. Like we had a lot of our own food, and we later on the guys would be playing cards a few weeks later or so, and you'd maybe use it to gamble playing cards or something, because you couldn't buy anything unless the canteen. Then you maybe buy something at the canteen, but we never had a canteen for a long time. Then you had to be back at the lines to find a canteen.
Right.
And we never got back at the lines. I think we were in action for 56. He said 56 days before they got relieved.
Wow, that seems like an extremely long time.
Well, yeah, apparently it was at the time, but you know your reserve group, and then because the Mortars, you're never really you're mixed up with the companies, and you got to be back about 100 yards or 200 yards back, because if you stop popping bombs, you're bringing down fire on them. So they didn't want you around. So you made sure you had a couple, and we didn't mind being about a couple 100 yards back, right. You know, because you get behind a fold in the ground or behind a house or something, you know, get some protection from the machine gun fire that way.
Now you mentioned that you didn't know specifically where you were going when you got on the boats, or until you got on the boat.
Yeah.
Do you remember what it sounded like on the boat? Were people talking? Were people, you know, or was it quiet? Do you remember any sounds as you were in the boat?
Yeah, we were on a landing craft tank, and we had 2 armor bulldozers in front, and we had 2 sections of mortars. Now, a section of mortars is 2 carriers each, and we had a trailer. And the trailer had an extra load of rations and an extra load of ammunition. And they gave us some loaves of bread in a sack, and they said it'd be good for 21 days. And I'll never forget this, and you'll laugh at this. I said, well, how do you know it's going to last for 21 days? He said, well, it's laced with formaldehyde. Keep it fresh. We don't know. They could do that, you know. You would know that. Yeah, and if it's preservative, it just so happens they preserve bodies too, but maybe they preserve bread as well. Yeah. Yeah. So we lost all that stuff. I'll tell you, we lost that the second night in there. We got overrun. We got stuck out there, and they were all around us, and we took off, and we left the carrier behind, and the carrier had all that bread in and the extra ammunition. And so we just got away in time. We thought, okay, we'll get it when we go. We take the ground the next day. We'll find the food and the ammo, but it was all gone. I guess the Jerry's got it too. Eh? They found the bread, and so they would make use of it. Yeah.
But were you ever scared though?
Well, you have that. You have that. You're all concerned. You know, it's a scared feeling of apprehension. You know, you're always worried about whether it's. But you look to support by being together. You know, if you're being together, and it's not. If you're scared, it would be contagious. It would be spread around everybody. You're worried, but there's always somebody that's. We had a pretty level-headed guy called. We used to nickname him Hopalong Cassidy because he looked like he was from the Peace River district up in the north west of Alberta, and he was a sort of a cowboy. He worked on a cattle ranch and so on. Uh-huh. He was a pretty cool customer, and he'd talk with a sort of a bit of a slow talk, and he was sort of like a mentor to the rest of us in a lot of ways. And he never got fouled up with any of that stuff. He seemed to be more cool, and that sort of became contagious. Because after a while, you get sort of I guess you become wary of what's going on. You know which shells are coming close and which aren't, and what machine gun fire, where it's coming from, and how to keep away. If you last long enough, you learn a lot of those things.
And can I ask you too, Mr. Parks, when did you enlist?
I enlisted in 1940.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Winnipeg.
Yeah, in Winnipeg. I was underage at the time when I enlisted. I'd been in cadets, so I knew all the drills, and I'd been in the region. They had the reserves, and I'd been in reserves for a bit, and then they came along and they had what they call a Selector Service Certificate, and they issued that to every civilian over age 18. So they took the nominal roll of our unit, and they made out a Selector Service Certificate for everybody and issued it to us. So when I was recruited, they said any proof of age. I had no birth certificate, but I had my Selector Service Certificate. And the sergeant who knew me from the cadets and other ones, he said, "Well, that's okay. Jim's okay." He said, "You have to be 18 to have the certificate." And he winked at me, you know.
What made you want to enlist, especially since you were underage? Like, what was your motivation?
Well, you know, we'd been cadets and you know, like in the 30s, we'd been cadets, and we knew a lot about World War I, and my dad had been in that, and there's different neighborhoods. Their dads had been in it, and it seemed like an adventurous thing to do. And all the neighborhood kids, even a lot of the boys were 17, 16, and a lot of them, we ended up, at that time they got away with it. It was early in the war. They get the first year or so, they got away with it, and they joined up. The guys were 18, 19, 17, and so my brother had been a year and a half older. He got in, so I thought, he can get in, I can get in. So I just laid about my age and so on, and I got in.
Where did you initially train? Where did that take place?
Right in Winnipeg. Now I look at the pictures of our troop, and I say to myself, geez, you know, you look at a few of us guys, you didn't fool anybody. How young you look, you say, well, geez, you know, we didn't fool anybody.
And at what point did you head to Europe? When were you deployed?
Well, I was in Winnipeg. We were there for about 10 months, and we were in a depot, and they needed the unit that I was posted to, the third div. They were doing what they call get rid of the sick, lame, and lazy. In other words, going through to make sure that everybody was healthy. And then they needed people to replace it, so they came to our Fort Ogden Barracks, and there were about 600 of us being trained there. And we were all seconded down to Campbell, Nova Scotia, and distributed among the units there. And I was distributed to the Winnipeg Rifles. And I was on a troop train with there were 60 on the troop train, and we come from Winnipeg right to Campbell Bird, and that was they attached it. They actually wasn't a troop train. They had two coaches, and the coaches were attached to the regular Dominion, which was a Trans-Canada CNR Trans-Canada train that went by every 24 hours. They had a new the Trans-Canada train would go across. They put our two coaches on the back, and we end up having special times for our meals because we had regular customers on the train. So really wasn't a troop train. Later on, troop trains come in.
Right.
Yeah, but that was an adventure itself. Going down from Winnipeg to Nova Scotia, because we'd stop at different division points, and we had one fellow with us, so he always seemed to find out where all the booze was, and he'd always come back. He was a type of guy that a big lumberjack fellow called McIver, and he carried his miniature Bible, and he used to be sort of religious, but he'd always seem to find the beer and the liquor, and he was always in a good mood. And if he got in a good mood, and he'd take out his miniature Bible, and if you happened to be standing somewhere, he'd just nail you, and he'd start preaching to you. He's such a big guy, you wouldn't resist that, you know.
Right.
Yeah, he started to preach, and so he always had put that Bible out, and he started preaching to you. And they actually caught him at a place in the division point somewhere in Nova Scotia. They stopped, and they were late in leaving. He said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Well, there's a soldier in front. There's a sent to Provo Corps. He won't get out of the way to the train." So we went down to see who it was. It was this guy McIver. He was preaching to the train with his Bible. He's standing in front of the train and preaching, and the train was a steam engine and it's hissing and puffing away, and he was just. They sent for the Provo Corps, but we managed to coax him back into the train. We said there are few Princess Patricias there that need more religion than the train, so he came along, and just before the MPs arrived,
So when you're first deployed, where were you first deployed to? Where were you serving?
In action?
Yeah.
Oh, we on the D-Day landing.
That was your first. That's the
first day. Our first landing was first exposure to action was on D-Day. Yeah. It was. Did I already talk about? Didn't I? Or did
yes. No. You did. So I didn't realize that was your first action.
It was, yeah, because we did a lot of training before then, and see, they tried to keep the Canadian Army to me. They didn't want to break them up, and they finally ended up doing that by sending the 1st Division and the 5th Division to Italy.
Right.
Yeah, to Sicily first.
Yep.
Was the 1st Div, then later on they sent the 5th Div. So that's when otherwise the Brits were always wanting one of the Canadians, but the politicians know we want all the Canadians to stay together, but they finally end up breaking them up.
So then with everyone, as you said, so there were some in Italy. Then you were obviously at the D-Day landing. Afterwards, you mentioned that you were sort of separated from your group for a few days. It took a while for everyone to get back together. You didn't have mortars.
Yeah.
You mentioned for about a week. So following D-Day, what were you tasked with, and what was your assignment?
With one of the other mortar sections, and then we ended up in a place called Putot, P-U-T-O-T, 2 days later, and that's when the Germans put in the counterattack, and we got overrun.
Mm-hmm.
Some spots was every man for himself. You look around, and the guy from Charlie Company in his little edge of the village, and I asked him, "Where's the rest of the company?" He says, "You can't go." He says, "They all being rounded up, and it's every man for himself." So I just joined him and went back to there's a farm about 300 yards behind, and that's another unit was there as a backup, and that's where I ended up going. And they put it in counterattack, and they retook the village. But we lost a lot of quite a few of the guys made it back to that farm. When I got there, there already was a few from Charlie Company, because Charlie Company was one of the original ones that was. They were able to sneak in because the grain field was 3 or 4 feet high, and you couldn't tell where they were. They sort of first thing you know, they're infiltrated into the battalion, into our grounds, and we weren't in really what you call a good position, because you take up a firing point and all you could see was high grass. It wasn't very good. They should have been really back in the village and overlooking the big fences, and then that way you could see better. But this is all looking back in hindsight, eh?
Right.
Because we were stuck out in the open.
Yeah. And then after that, was it so after that day, after that counterattack, then what happened? What was your next task?
Well, the next move was we ended up back with the Mortar Headquarters, our group. Then they sped us around again with the other sections until the idea was to stay together, because we're already trained. They didn't want to split us up until we got new mortars and new carriers, because we expected to get them in a matter of a day or two, but it took about more than 2 weeks or 3 weeks before we got a set. First of all, they give us a 1,500 weight truck, and they give us mortars. And then about 2 weeks later, they took the truck away and gave us a carrier. But for a while, But before we got any of this stuff, they spread us among the other mortars, and we were either if we weren't helping them, they had us doing some other duties. The Battalion Headquarters would have us need somebody. Would get us to do something.
Do you remember where you were on Victory in Europe Day?
Victory in Europe? Oh, yeah. Let's see. VE Day, right?
Yes.
A place called Emsden, Emsden. Uh-huh. And we knew that a few days ahead of time that the Germans were going to surrender. And so what they did, I was a sergeant by that time, and we sergeants had in our mortars we had a pair of field glasses, and we had a compass, and we had something else, and a watch. And so 2-3 days before we knew the surrender was coming, they had us turn them in. We had to turn in the field glasses, the watch, and the other one, the glasses. Uh-huh. Because what they were worried about, they'd be losing them. People would be selling them or something like that, you know.
Right.
But the Canadian Army had a very narrow mind of the people, so they come along, so take them away from them because they may. So what they ended up doing is they ended up giving them to the Dutch and the other people anyway, or took them, and a lot of that stuff was destroyed, right?
Right.
Yeah, because it would didn't want to put it back in the market because the industry would lose out, so they destroyed a lot of that stuff. Right.
Did you celebrate on VE Day?
We didn't really do these. We were in a hut. We took over a sort of a abandoned house, and we used that as our headquarters. And we got our rations, and we were able to cook our own rations because we had our Tommy cooker, and we played cards there. And we didn't do anything. We had pickets. We had pickets out, picket is a guard duty. So to guard our equipment and so on, we had two of those, always on 24-hour duties there so we wouldn't lose any of that stuff. We still had our ammo and our mortar bombs and everything else, and so we had them for quite a while afterwards. It's just the other technical equipment like watches and compasses and that we didn't, and field glasses.
Right.
They wanted to take they figured we flogged them. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
They didn't trust us with them.
Right.
They would lose a lot of them. So the brain waves up in the headquarters, they had ways of doing those things. First thing they do, turn them in.
Right. And how long was it before you went home?
Oh, let's see. September.
Okay.
Yeah, September 45.
Okay.
Yeah, we got that. It actually, they had priorities or something, and I was in what they call the 954. Oh, you remember that now? 954 draft. And I use that number even now for different things. And there's a mixture of everybody. It was depending on your priorities. Your name was thrown in the hat somewhere, and I end up with a group of different people from different units. And I end up with ever hear of a guy called Eddie Dynamite James?
I have not, no.
Well, I'll tell you, back when the football days in the 40s and late 30s, they had a guy that was a fullback, and his name was James, and they called him Eddie Dynamite James. He's about 5'10", about 4 foot wide, built like a fire hydrant.
Yeah.
That was his nickname, Dynamite. So I was ending up with him, and we ended up a different group of guys. Al Vickery, ended up with him. He was a representative of the Canadian Press. I don't know how he ended up with all the infantry guys and artillery guys, but he ended up being in our draft, And we had the 954 draft. Each draft was about 220 people, and I guess they just allocated drafts to different boats. And I ended up back in England, and we're waiting around. We're supposed to have gone for a certain time, and I enjoyed that time in England because we finally, when I got my hooks, my 3 sergeant hooks, it was you didn't have much privileges when you're over in France and Germany and those places. But we got in England, we're in a regular barracks and all the privileges a senior NCO has,
Yeah.
And the first thing you know that the drafts were supposed to wait for 3 months, and then I was on leave, and a notice coming across that we'd report back for duty, otherwise we'd lose all our pay, what they call deferred pay. Because what they did when we were overseas, they kept half of your pay and just gave you half to spend, and the other half was kept for what they call deferred. So we give it to you on discharge.
So with that, the call dropped, and I could not get back in touch with Mr. Parks that evening. Fortunately, though, he was gracious enough to speak with me again to follow up on what we had talked about, and our conversation moved more into the post-D-Day period where he was stationed, what he went through. He talked about a hospital stay that he had, also how he and his fellow service members felt about the Germans. So our initial conversation that you just heard, that took place on Friday, May the 24th, and what you are now about to hear is our follow-up discussion, which took place on the evening of Monday, May the 27th. So once again, here is Jim Parks. In the months after the war, after you land at Juno Beach there,
yeah.
Where was your next stop?
It's the next stop. It's we stopped at with the Puteaux was the next big one. That was June the 8th.
Okay.
We got overrun there by the 12th SS, and we lost about our total casualties altogether is about 260 killed, wounded, and captured. And that's where when they captured, they murdered 58 of our boys, the SS. And that's where Kurt Meyer was what do they call it? The war grave, the commission after what do they call it when they get these guys for doing the war crimes? Yeah.
Oh,
Kurt Meyer.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because they murdered 58, and apparently he was guilty, and something happened, and then he was it was supposed to be shot or something, and it was it was dismissed by Chris Folks, the Major General. That's normally that's a routine. When you get generals trying generals, you never shoot them. You give them whatever you make the supreme decision. He always remanded down to something else, and he apparently what he ended up doing somewhere that we heard later on. He was up in the Northwest Territory on that highway, the big highway, what is it, leads up to Alaska, and he was planning the defense of Canada if Russia invaded.
Okay.
Yeah, we heard that way back when. Yeah, so, but I never seen it written down anywhere because I never bothered reading it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So how did you feel? Like, what was the reaction of the guys when you hear about the murder of your compatriots, really, by the SS? What is the reaction there?
We were pretty annoyed by it, ticked off, and then they said to the information we got down there wasn't to be any retaliation. This is a war crime, etc., whatever the words were, and it was expected that there would be no retaliation, and all prisoners would be treated according to the Geneva, whatever they call it, convention.
Yes.
Yeah. The words to that effect, eh?
Right.
I remember the warning come out to that, because we didn't get the opportunity to pick up prisoners, and they didn't want the retaliation. If you caught them, you'd start, one thing led to another, and it'd be contagious,
Right.
Yeah.
Did that change the way, though, that you approached your job within the service? Did it give you, I hate to say more motivation, but even though you can't take revenge sort of outside the rules of warfare, is there sort of this desire to, get them?
We thought I think the reaction was generally that we got to be tougher because these are tough guys, we're running against people who had no respect for the surrender, and they would shoot people and all that sort of jazz, So there was
right.
We didn't have any. This let us know that all the prisoners would be treated according to there'll be no hostile violence towards Christmas. Words to that effect, eh?
How did you talk about the Germans, though? Did you, was there? Did you make jokes? Did you hate them, or did you talk about it even at all? Did they come up when you're sort of back and eating or playing cards, whatever you do on your downtime? Did you talk about them?
What we talked about is what they did and what the how they would and when we took over someplace, went forward and you just chased them out, and you just talked about what you found. The rifles were lying around, and what to do to watch for the booby traps and that sort of thing. But there was I can't remember being this far back any hatred that you just sort of mowed them down, that type of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you by chance? Oh, sorry. Did you by chance have anybody on that you were serving with who was of German descent, who had German parents or grandparents?
Oh yeah, there's Pete Enns. He was a Mennonite. He was originally a Mennonite from southwestern Manitoba. And he could speak German and was as good as he could speak English. But he was Canadian, right? So, right. But he was a German-speaking. We had 2 or 3 others, but I can't recall him. I remember Pete because he reminded us of a cowboy at the time, Hopalong Cassidy. So his nickname was Blondie or Hoppy. That's the nickname we gave him. Yeah. He's a good-looking guy. About 5'11", 190 pounds, that sort of thing.
So everyone trusted him. There wasn't this sense of, well, he speaks German, he's a Mennonite, maybe we should be leery of him? There was none of that?
No, he figured he had the Canada badge on his shoulder, he's one of the boys, and he come in, he just accepted the way the guy was. He didn't think about his background. You might have heard about it later on, but he didn't think about it later. He didn't think about it. Like offhand, I'm just trying to get the name of the guy, but it just won't come to my mind at the moment. The guy that come from the Mennonite place. Well, Pete Enns originally, his family way back when had been in the Mennonite colony in southwestern Manitoba.
So after you're inland and there's the murder of the 59 guys, so what's your next step after that? Where are you deployed to from there?
Oh yeah, we sort of went to our next big step would be at Carpiquet Airfield in the first 3 or 4 days of July, and that was a real battle. We called it a Hellhole. I remember that was a real hellhole because we were dug in, but there was they had their mortar, the molding minis. You heard of those, eh?
No, what are those?
The 6-barrel mortars, rocket propelled, 125 pounds each. And when the rockets went off, then you get 6 of them spread around, and they'd spread out, and they're 125 pounds each. It caved in our trench. It landed close enough that it caved in our trench. And another one that's landed far enough that the concussion was really bad. But the one where they caved in the trench, we dug right in because we could really hear it. We sort of got crouched near the bottom. It's a good thing we did because although we had the parapet, the shells or the fragments would come through the dirt, and it came through the top 6 inches of our trench because it's that close, eh?
Right.
Yeah.
And were you, when that happened, were you concerned that you were in mortal danger, or did you feel secure that you had that trench?
Well, it wasn't. You wouldn't have any individual things like that. It was the whole moment.
Right.
You're in the trench and you're saying you crouch at the bottom and hoping to grace it wouldn't hit you.
Right.
It was, we say it close. Like Bob Hussey was my trench partner, and he was always quick talking and so on. And that was Jimmy Close to me. That's Jimmy Close. And it got so bad. He said the only way we're going to get out of here is feet first. I remember him saying that.
Wow.
That was at that time because it was really we had shelled so much and was so close, and it like a cave in the trench, and I got rattled a bit, and it was really bad, When it really, you can imagine how they felt, because we sent twice as much over to them as we did they sent to us. So they must have really been rattled.
Yeah. Did you ever think of that? You say that now that they must have been rattled on the other side. While you were doing it, did you ever think of what the other side was experiencing, or was it more, we're doing our job, this is what we have to do? Like, or were you conscious of what was happening over on the other side?
Well, we were thinking. We thought that they'd already there was an attack put in, and we thought they'd already taken care of all that stuff. But when they moved back, they moved their they used to move their artillery and mortars around. They didn't leave them in the same place, and they were very effective. And they knew the ground too, because they'd been on the ground before for 3 years, eh?
Yep.
And they knew the ground pretty well, and they could just pick something on the map and they zero it in right from the map. The number of yards it was and so on, and then set the what they call the sights that way, and they could crank it in, because they had an idea, and especially orchards. Most time we end up being in orchards, and the orchards were their favorite place to shoot. So a lot of times we found out we just had to try to get away from the orchards, by 50 yards or so either side, because they picked the orchards were their favorite place to throw their shells, especially the mortars. They use their mortars a lot. The 88 they use, which is what an 88 is, a gun, right. 88 millimeter gun, and it's a high velocity. It was really originally it's an AK gun, and they can fire anti-tank shells, or they can fire regular. And most when they did fire them, they fired air burst, so they explode over your trench about 30 feet above, and the shrapnel would come down. So what you had to do is try to cover your trench in the middle, so you protect it from any shrapnel coming down. That way you leave a hole in each end, right?
Right.
Yeah, and you do your best to try to find in a neighborhood houses and barns and just rip off boards from fences or whatever. There weren't many fences because they're all stone, but the gates were. So you rip off the gates and rip off the boards and use that for the center, or rip off a door or somewhere. Cover that up.
Right.
You always found something.
Yeah. Well, is that so? With what you were talking about, is that why the orchards were so popular with the Germans? Is that why they felt it was so effective? Because they had that type of weaponry?
Well, it's a good weapon. It's their Nebelwerfer, which is the one I told you about, the 6-barrel mortar, rock repeller. That was one of the most effective method of firing. Artillery is okay, but mortars, you got a high trajectory and they come down straight, right? Or a small angle where an artillery piece, you're firing at an angle 30 degrees or 40 degrees off the ground, and it's coming over. But the other one goes up and comes down, right? That's what the mortar does. So the chances of hitting the trenches, and it can fire. You can fire and go over the house. Nothing will stop it, because you can fire it so it'll land in the yard behind the house. Right. Because it goes not. I could say, just for example, it's not going straight up. It's going up at an angle and a high trajectory, and then it comes down. Usually, depending on the range, it could be anywhere from 18 to 25 seconds from the time you fire it. And sometimes a lot of times you can hear pop, pop, pop the firing. You can hear the fire in the mortar. So you had 18 to 20 seconds if they're firing in your area to make sure you're covered up.
Now, you mentioned part of that covering up was getting anything you could from the surrounding area.
Yeah.
Did you, as you were doing that, were there any civilians left in the areas where you were?
Something they seemed to want to hang around, because they could sort of in that area in Normandy, there was everything was stone. There was no wooden houses or anything else. Every stone houses and stone walls and fences and so on. So they're pretty well protected. They knew where to get in the equipment shed or so on and so forth. Not saying there weren't any casualties, because there were, right?
Did you interact with civilians as you were going through at all?
Well, some of the guys could speak French, and we could a bit. The interaction wasn't that much, because we were more in around our trenches, and the only people would be in the farmhouses would be maybe a headquarters or somebody like that, or platoon headquarters, and they were ourselves. We'd be further out in our trenches.
Right.
Yeah, and there was some interaction, I guess, at the especially with the wells. You try to make sure that if you want to use the water from the wells, as long as the farmer was using it, it was okay. Because they always say you have to watch the wells will be poisoned. But I can't remember any Germans poisoning any wells. And all that time I was there, I can't remember that.
Okay.
If there was, I never heard about it.
Okay. Now you mentioned too that when we talked on Friday that as this is all going on, I think you said the number was 59 days in a row, but it could even have been longer than that you were sort of on duty.
56.
56.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Thank you. Now, how did you have any downtime within that 56 days? Like, was there times where you and the guys were, maybe playing cards or just chatting, or was there any downtime in that?
You rotate back, and there was some times when they take you back for. We took us back for shower twice.
Right.
Yeah, the mobile showers.
Okay.
And that's when they started the shell, and the Major General, he was over there. He was there too, just to say hi to the boys and all that sort of stuff. He was there half an hour before we were, and they started the shell, and he ran, and he apparently jumped into the trench, and there's two guys already in there, and he jumped on top of them. That story became only in the Maple Leaf. The Maple Leaf was the newspaper they printed for the military over there.
Okay.
And if you're lucky, you got a copy. We seldom got copies, but it was in there.
Okay.
Same as they put chocolates out, the Victory. The Victory chocolates?
Uh-huh.
They came on the poster, all soldiers. When I first saw them?
When?
A year ago in Holland. They had them out. They made in Toronto, and the guy showed us all of it. I said, is that what they look like? We never got down as far as us. A lot of stuff maybe wouldn't get all the way down to the infantry units.
Right.
It wouldn't happen that way.
Well, what would make it then? I mean, if you were lucky to get a newspaper, you didn't get any of the Victory chocolates. I mean, what sort of stuff did you get?
Well, the only way you can get it is somebody escorted that stuff down. Because along the way, what the troops are like and what military is like. The stuff same as those cigarettes used to come over in packages of 300.
Uh-huh.
And we had some sent over to us. I didn't smoke, but if I got the packages, which were 12.25s, I could sell them and make a few bucks or a few pounds for my leave, right?
Right.
And a lot of times I know they said it was $3. I know 2-3 times that they sent them from home, but we never got them. They disappeared along the way. And they said, well, it happened on a boat. And there's different reasons they had but some got filtered through. And when the guys got them, they spread them about. They maybe sold them for a shilling or two,
Right.
If other guys didn't get them. But we asked our parents to send them, but at that time they found it a little tough themselves to spend $3 on and all that to send it over. That was back in the war years, right?
Right.
And it was they had it tough going. Right. So they would just occasionally spend the money to send the cigarettes. They knew we didn't smoke. When time of the letter we go over, we tell them that we're using the cigarettes to sell in order to get money for our leave,
Right. Right.
And so I ended up getting 3 packages sent over, and I ended up getting 1.
Okay.
I remember that. No more than 3.
Right. And you were able to use the money for a leave?
Oh, yeah, for when you're on leave, because all you got is £2.10 a month.
Right.
And you got a 48-hour leave. You're allowed a 9-day leave every 3 months. So you got a 148 every month, and you had to buy your ablution stuff, your shaving gear, your soap and toothpaste and that sort of stuff. And so you did your best to save what you could in order to. They used to have the post office savings bank over in England, this is where mostly that happened. Because once we got on the province over in France, we didn't worry about money unless we captured a prisoner. Then we took the francs off them or whatever they had, you know.
Right.
You know,
So,
I'll tell you a little on the side. There's one officer I met. He was our paymaster when the reserve force downtown Toronto in the signal unit. He was also a paymaster during the war years, and you could trade the Dutch money and get the equivalent of pounds back, English pounds, but you didn't get a good rate. So he was collecting all his guilders, what they call the Dutch guilders.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of him cashing and putting in the bank, he was buying insurance. So when he come back, he had a big nest egg of insurance, which he cashed in.
Oh.
How about that, eh? But no,
yeah.
a lot of people knew that, but not down in the ranks. We didn't know that. But I found out later because I was in reserve outfit, and their paymaster was one of the guys who did it.
Right.
He said, weren't you in on that? I said, no. I said, how do you expect us to be in it? We're sitting in a hole in the ground. We didn't have any money, so what the heck?
Right.
That's quieting him down a bit.
You said once you got to France, you weren't too worried about money. Once you were in France, did you take a leave back to England at any point?
The leave I got back was when I got in Holland.
Okay, when you were in Holland. Okay.
Somewhere in January, I think it was January, I got a leave to go back to England. That's when I got my holiday, and I just got back in time, and they launched a big attack, what they call the Spring Offensive, in February.
Right.
I got it in January, and I got a leave to go back to. It was supposed to be a priority for leave. You get so many points for this and points for that. But we had guys going on leave that were sitting in Brussels in the headquarters. They were getting their leave before we did. So I mean, it was never really enforced enough, you know.
Right.
Because we had not that our own people didn't, our own officers, right? They would used to complain about we have people that are eligible with a number of points, and they deserved to get their leave before they had run into some bad luck, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
What did you do on your leave?
Oh, you just pub crawling. I remember I used to go. My favorite place was Sheffield, England. What happened is we were sitting there around, and you have a knife, fork, and spoon, and the guy was saying, "This is before we went over to France. Where do you think I should go and leave?" And I looked at my life, and my life had Sheffield cutlery. And I said, "How about Sheffield?" So we went to Sheffield, and it was the best bet we ever made. It was quite an improvement. Well, yeah, it was improvement from the south in England. You had to walk up to the bar and buy a pint of beer or something. But up in the Midlands in Sheffield, you press the button behind your chair, and a waiter come over, or a waitress. It was usually a waitress because the men were always either in the forces or some other work, and you'd order your beer that way. And mostly 2 pints was enough, you know. Mm-hmm. For me, that was plenty. 2 pints.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then because you had to save money for having a little snack. Usually, you can get chips. You could always get chips, French fries. You know, they'd wrap them up in newspaper. Lots of vinegar and salt.
So your diet while you were on leave was basically chips and beer?
Well, you can get a bed and breakfast at the YMCA for 1 and 6 or 1 and 2pence, and you'd have maybe 1 shilling. You maybe have about 40 shillings for your leave. So if you go into a place and you do 1 and 2pence, you got your bed and breakfast already. You already got your meal for the day.
Yeah.
And there's enough they have British canteens which are open 24 hours a day. That was for the people working in the factories in England. They're working 24 hours a day, and they always had some place to go to eat afterwards. And the meals were substantial, and there's only 1 bob for it, which 1 shilling for the meal. And they allowed soldiers in. It was mainly for the workers, but they allowed soldiers in. And the Canadians, we had a bit of a swagger. They sort of welcomed us in anywhere.
So, and that's just because of the reputation?
I don't know. Yeah, but we were well liked by the Yanks and the English, and sometimes the English and the Yanks didn't along, but we were always along with everybody. That was the Canadian way. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the way we were. I'd call it swagger now. That's a word we picked up lately. So it must be because we had the swagger, you know.
I like that.
Yeah.
So you said you made it back to the line, to the front for the spring offensive.
Yeah, I got there before that big one. I think I was there 2 days before, and then they were saying there's something big coming up. And I remember it was at night. All of a sudden, the whole was quiet. Then all of a sudden, everything broke loose. Rotten noise. I don't know how long it was. Must be a couple hours or so. That was a February one. And they just kept firing and firing and firing and firing. And actually, what they were hoping to do, they were hoping that the ground was firm and soft. Not soft, but firm from the winter. And they planned it all ahead of time. But 2 days before the actual happened, we had a thaw. So that meant that they had a tough time with the tanks and everything else, you know.
So you think the weather was a real...
The frost wasn't that deep there. It was not like here. You get frost some places up to 4 feet into the ground, right?
Right.
That's why you have to fix your basement up so you insulate it 4 feet from the top to the down. And always that. Otherwise, you get frost on the walls, right?
Mm-hmm. So you really think the weather was beneficial?
Oh yeah. It was bad. Yeah, it was bad because we had the mortars. We had the 3-inch mortars, and what we had to do is the casings for the mortars. You had 3 bombs in it, but the casings were not too bad. And you'd put the casings down and chomp on it, and then you put the base plate on top. And the first 2 or 3 bombs you fire would secure that the base plate of the mortar into the ammunition, empty ammunition cartons, and then you get a firm base. Otherwise, if you didn't, up in the Leopold Canal, we didn't have any of that. And after you fired about 10 or 12 bombs, the barrel went down about 6 or 7, sometimes 1.5 feet, and you had to pick it out and get the barrel out, and then dig out the base plate and move it somewhere else. Because we didn't have time to put any of the cartons down. Right. Yeah. And we were firing, moving and firing and moving and firing, and it would go down about 1.5 feet, because a lot of the grounds were onto being secured from the ocean in Holland, in Belgium too. Okay. Some of the places we're at.
Now that sounds somewhat chaotic, though, to have to be moving and firing and doing all this on the go. Like, how organized was it?
Well, you had to be. It's a habit thing. You know you got to do it, and you do it. And of course, you had your trenches. You would try to, say you're near a dike, you put the trenches in the dike, because if you dig in the ground, the water level was only 6 inches below the ground, because the dike was formed in squares, and in the middle of the square they called it a polder, and that's where they had their crops and so on. And they reinforced if they had any walkway for horses and wagons, it was reinforced with extra earth or stones. And the rest of the time, if you try to fire the mortars, it just sunk into the ground, right? Right. And it's the same as for digging in. It was pretty hard to dig in.
Because of the wet, because of the frost and the weather? Is it still cold?
It was cold and wet. They didn't have that much frost. Except around Nijmegen in the wintertime, but then they wouldn't have the deep frost like here, right? Right. It'd be cold, and the snow was sort of a wet snow. Okay. It's sort of a wettish snow. Like a little aside, we're stationed outside of Groesbeek, and we're digging near a forest, and then the word got back that somebody had found this place where there was a big vats of wine, and so sent a couple of guys from our platoon with jerry cans. You know what a jerry can is, eh? Yeah. Yeah. They sent a jerry cans, and they went back to and said, "Bring a jerry can," and they had to make their way across this open area. There was an open area, and there was canals here and there, and they had to get into this barn where all these vats were. And at first, we were one of the first to get in there. And within about 2 hours, there were 15 hundredweights coming. They weren't supposed to go along that road, and they got shelled, and a couple of them had the truck went off the road and blocked the road. And finally, the MPs come along and blocked anybody from going out in that area, except for the infantry companies that were there. But that's how they got a lot of wine that way. And this guy hid the wine. He walked in the bush, and he hides in this big jerry can of wine. And they said, "Where was he?" He said, "You'll never find it." All we did was follow his footprints in the snow, because he had a few drinks and he didn't realize he didn't think about wiping out his footprints. Yeah, kind of funny. That was an odd little thing that happens. Yeah.
At what point through the spring there did you really feel, or did you at all feel as though the momentum was on your side, and did you ever get the sense that the other side was on the verge of surrendering? What did you really feel as though the end was coming and that you guys were getting to that point?
Well, we had the advantage. We knew this. We had the air power, and we seemed to have more stuff, more tanks, more guns, and everything else. Although they were stronger defenders because they're defending their own country, right? Right. And they set up. It's easier to defend than it is to attack. So they're able to set up ways of attacking, and they're very good at that. The Germans are always good at that. They're well disciplined soldiers, right? And right. They're always good at with their mortars and their artillery, and they tend to move them around a bit. Have resistant pockets, and they use some of the same tactics in Russia and it didn't work. It worked for the Russians, but it didn't work against the Canadians. We sort of had a way of getting around them. So this is one thing that the German soldiers and the officers later on said that some of the tactics they use in Russia they couldn't use in Holland and Germany.
So you said that the Germans said that the tactics in Russia couldn't be used against you. Why was that?
They said it wasn't effective. Because I think it's because the Russian soldiers were different. They had a different way I understand it from reading it. They had a different. They have more of a discipline, and we often heard that they had the front line, and if there's an attack coming in, they couldn't go back because the machine guns were behind them. Anybody tried to retreat, they'd wipe them out.
Okay.
You read about that too, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what you've heard, but they said the Canadians are best at going forward, but they're not as better. The English are better defenders. The Canadians always they said they found it. They say, okay, it's no use taking the crap here. It's safer over there, and they move another place. This is what we heard later on. They are intended. The discipline was okay, but there's a lot of critique afterwards. You wonder how they can get the critique that way.
Right.
Because the Canadians and Brits weren't natural born killers, were they?
No.
No, they're just people that were just trained to go in and say kill or be killed, and you didn't have that same instinct to say when some of these people, like the samurai or whatever you call these people,
Yeah. No, and we talked on Friday about the end of the war. I'm curious with sort of, did you take any souvenirs home with you from your time in Europe?
Well, how I got it was there was a hut. We were in a shack, not a shack, but a house, and we had a picket outside, and somebody came along with a truck, a German truck, and this little guy from this little Mennonite kid. He says there's a German soldier out there. They got a truckload of arms, and they want to know where to take them. I said, what are they? He said, we don't know. He said, well, let's go and have a look. So I went out there and I had a look, and he dropped the back tailgate, and here's all these pistols and everything else, and a little bit further back, because there's machine guns and there's rifles and everything else. But the main stuff was all these pistols. And so I said, go in and tell the boys. And meanwhile, I grabbed a couple of them, and everybody come out and help themselves. Then we told them where to go take the rest of them back up to headquarters. So we got our share of them before anybody else did. So I ended up getting I got a P-38 Luger and a two-shot Browning, sort of a Browning that's a small caliber, .32, for putting in a lady's purse. That's what they said, for putting in a lady's purse. But the P-38 is exactly the same as a Luger. It's a Belgian Luger, the P-38. Okay. The Luger is a prize pistol, right? You've heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry, go ahead.
The P-38 is a duplicate. It's the Belgian duplicate of the Luger.
Okay. What did you do with them?
Well, I had mine for a long time, and we kept them. And when the war was over, we come back. We're ready to come back to England, and we got on a boat. They said anybody caught bringing back German Lugers, this, that, or another thing, would lose their rank and lose all their what they call the rehabilitation pay. And people were throwing the things overboard, and I didn't throw mine overboard. I figured this is a threat. It's the same threat they made over in England on something else. And that was the way the Canadians were. But a few guys threw their stuff overboard. They didn't want to be caught with it. But I just headed up my pack, and I stashed this pack up above, and there was the rack up above, and I jammed everything up on there. But nobody come around to search for anything, so we were okay.
So it made it home with you?
Oh, see, they always made threats like that,
Right. So they made it home with you to Winnipeg?
Well, I got it home, and then I had it home, and my brother took it with him. He stayed in the armed forces, and he had it with him in the army camp, and he was showing it around to people, and somebody stole it from his kit.
Oh. Yeah,
and I also had an armband, a swastika armband, and I had a small 8-inch blade Hitler Youth dagger. They wore on their belt. They had the Hitler Youth dagger. It had a swastika on the handle, bone-handled, with a swastika right in the middle. And I got that from where the heck did I get that? We got into an old factory, and somebody had opened up a safe that was there. They all said there's nothing in it, and we went in. So there's all flags and everything else. But on the way out, I spotted this. What the hell do you call it? Not a filing cabinet, but something similar. So I went in, I rifled that, and I reached behind, and sure enough, I picked up a pistol. Stuck away at the back. Yeah. So I say it lasted for about a year until somebody stole it off my brother. He stayed in the armed forces.
Right, and same with the armband and the dagger?
Well, that's the armband and the dagger too. And he kept them all. He took them with him because he showed them around in camp, and
right.
And he had them in his barrack box, which was locked and everything else. But they rifled everything out of the barrack box.
Okay, so everything was stolen.
Oh yeah, they took any pistols or anything else. He had a few things. He had mine. He had a couple of his own souvenirs. They took those too.
Okay.
That's there's lots of the guys around like that, and not all. There's bastards as well as angels, right?
Yes, very true. How long? I believe you said that you've been back to Europe. How long was it before you went back?
I mean, from England? I mean, from Holland or
yeah.
Germany. Oh,
anywhere that you served, really.
Oh, we stayed there. We stayed in. They took us back to a place called Utrecht, and it was a town, but they never liked to leave infantry battalions, soldiers in a town. So they moved us out to small villages away, and we were at a place called Ede, E-D-E. We were there for about 3 months, and we had a couple of leaves, which is okay. I had a leave to Antwerp and a leave to Brussels. So 4 days. Well, by the way, I had another one in January 45. we were in reserves, and they come around and they said, anybody, they give us points for how long you've been in the active force from Normandy on, and a bunch of people that hadn't the same points, they got a bunch of leave, and there was hell to pay, and they come back and we got our leave, and I had a bit of time. I spent a time in Antwerp, Belgium, and it was a real ball because we had what they call the Hotel Metropole, and that was for NCOs and up, sergeants and up. And so when they booked me in, I was in the same room as a sergeant from the American Army, and he had a lot of money. They had more money than we did, right?
Right.
And I had a lot of francs and so on. So him and I buddied up, and we went to the different cafes over the next 3 or 4 days. He had to go back, and I said, "Who do you belong with?" He says, "It's the Fifth Army, the Patton's Army." Oh, I said, "Blood and guts, Patton." He said, "Yeah, he's our blood and his guts." I'll never forget him saying that. He was a sergeant. I never got his name. I knew his name at the time, but I never kept his name, or I guess I should have. Would have been a good idea.
Right. But what about after the war? So you come home. Did you ever have a desire to go back to see all the, like, as a civilian, to go back and see all the places that you had served?
Well, what the desire was we had such a good time in England prior to going over to France. In other words, when there's pubs there, and all those wartime, you can still enjoy yourself. You can go to a movie, you can meet up with a girlfriend at a dance or something like that. There was that type of thing, and I come back. It wasn't the same type of atmosphere. It was a different type of atmosphere. Back in Canada, not the same way.
Right. So how long did it take you then to adjust to get back to civilian life?
I think when I look back, it must have been about, even though I got a job and all that, it must have been about 4 or 5 years until, at least that much time, yeah. Oh God, yeah. When I look back at it, even though I had a good job and that, and a lot of guys are the same way. You don't really adjust that quick, because you're used to that swagger so much during the wartime and all that, and then you come back and it's a different style. And I was in the fire department for 5 years, and they had what they did is they made a whole new shift. Instead of 2 shifts, they went to a 3-shift system, and they hired veterans. So they had competitions. You put your name in, and they had 700 names, and we got interviewed twice, and then they picked 140, and I was one of the 140. And so, meanwhile, some of the other guys had already got other jobs, but so I ended up being with them. I was working with I was going to be a partner in a contracting business with my brother-in-law, and I quit that, and I went into the fire department. Shift work. I didn't like the shift work, I used to play baseball, and I made the team, and then you'd be away for a week, and somebody else took your place. It'd be hard to get back in,
Yeah.
I used to hate that shift work,
Mm-hmm. Did you serve with the fire department for the rest of your career?
5 years. 5 years.
And then what did you do?
Well, that way, you see, I didn't go back to school when I come back. I only had grade 9 when I joined up. So while I was on shift work, I was going to business college. I got I could have got, you had this re-establishing credits. You're allowed 2 years after you get back they pay your way through college, through high school, and you had to have certain marks, then you go to college, eh? But I never got into that because I wasn't settled down enough. And so I ended up going to myself, and I got the provincial certification for my high school, and I started to go taking classes at the university.
Okay.
And I went full time at the university, but I couldn't get paid by the Veterans Affairs. I found out later I could have, but I didn't know what the rules were. They said if you got a pension, disability pension, you then become eligible all over again to qualify for these benefits. But nobody told me about that. So I ended up having a job and going to school at the same time.
And what was your degree in?
Pardon?
What did you study? What did you study?
What did I do?
Yeah, like what was your major? What did you study in school when you went?
Actually, it was history. History mainly. The mathematics, I had a heck of a time with mathematics. I always had that as a sub to go back and do it again. But yet later on, I worked with Department of Finance. I used to go out and do audits of offices and everything else. So, it was a different style. It's not the same as doing mathematics, is it?
Right.
You're doing auditing of budgets and so on and so forth. And that was my job. What they call a field management officer. I'd review the budgets and I'd review the administration. I had to make an assessment whether the manager was good enough or not, how he operated, and you had to check on the supervisor, were they doing their job and all that sort of. That was what they call the field management operations, checking on everybody.
In your post-military career, how often would you connect with the guys you served with? Were you active in the Legion? Did you go to any reunions?
Well, I did for a while, but I rejoined the reserves,
Okay.
I spent 15 years, and I got my commission. I retired as a major.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was, I was in the Signal Corps. I started off with 1 year in the infantry, and I moved from Winnipeg. I was down in Ottawa then. I moved from Ottawa to Toronto, and I continued on with my Signal Corps down in Toronto. Then I moved to Belleville, and they didn't have any room for me. I was a major then, so I went on supplementary reserve. I even tried to take a demotion and get a captain's rank, but there wasn't anything available. Because I liked going down there, It was a good. You knew all the ropes, eh?
Right.
You didn't have to look in the books or anything else, and because I'd studied a lot on the manuals and knew where to look and all this sort of stuff. So it was second nature to do things. Where a new guy come in, I'd have to go thumbing through the manuals and all that stuff. I didn't have to do that. I knew what everything was.
Right.
Yeah.
But during that time, would you meet up with guys who you served with back in the war, in the Second World War? Like, did you maintain those connections during the rest of your life?
There's one or two in Winnipeg that I did. A guy that was a guy called Bill Koba. He was a dispatch writer in headquarters, and he came up in the fire department with me. And there's three others that were in the fire department, and there's another couple of veterans who were in the First Hussars, which they always were the ones that supported us with their tanks, and we got to know them pretty good. And they said, we were always supporting the Winnipegs. 7th Brigade he said our squadron was always located with the Winnipeg. So I got to know guys like that,
Okay. When you look, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just say it's once you're in the rapport, you sort of, when you meet other people in the services like that, there's no introduction because they're all part of one game, and it's easy to converse.
Right.
There's always bastards around too. I mean, it's you avoided them, but most people were pretty easy to get along with.
Did you ever have a tough time talking about your experience with your family or with people who weren't there? Was that challenging for you?
No, because I wrote a lot of anecdotes, and they know the anecdotes, and my daughters typed them up over the years. It's not a blood and guts thing. It's a general description where words like carpe and about the shelling and buried in a trench here and there, but it was nothing about I shot this guy or shot that. It's all about generalities, eh?
Right.
And I got anecdotes I wrote up a few years back. I wrote them up, and they're all handwritten, and a lot of them she typed them up, and I had some typed up before. And I started off. What happened? I was at Wilford, across from. Did I tell you this? I was a manager of a manpower office there across from Wilford Laurier's University, and they did a talk about D-Day one time. I saw it in the Legion magazine. It was going to be done in Laurier University, and I went over and I got acquainted with the history teacher, and he said, "You start writing these things down." I said, "Well, I don't know, maybe you should do anything." So I started writing a few little anecdotes down, and he bought them into him. He says, that's great. He says, so I left him copies because he said he could always refer them, you know.
Right. So how would you say that your service time in the military, how did that influence your life? Like, did you ever think about how your life would be different if you hadn't served?
Oh yeah, because now what you do, I think maybe in the services like that, they learn to size people up, right? In groups, you sort of evaluate. You do that ordinarily, even in civilian life. But you have such a massive group in the military that you learn to size people up. And even afterwards, when I see people, I compare them to, he just reminds me of somebody you knew. Like good points and the bad points. You said they remind you of, you sort of evaluate them and compare them to some of the good guys and the bad guys that you had in the services with. Because you had a good time to evaluate people. I think you do it automatically. I'm saying evaluate, it sounds like I'm an analyst, but I'm not. I'm just trying to say it's you're sort of figuring how people are and size them up and so on. Whether you know whether you're going to be getting along with them or not after no time. I remember a guy called. I was in the hospital in England, and after I came out of the hospital, I went to what they call a holding depot. It's for rehab, and then you get back to your unit if you're lucky. And I met this guy Haggerty from the Regina Rifles, and we sat down beside each other. In a matter of 2-3 minutes, you think we've been friends for life, you know. And we were together for a whole week, and the reason I say a whole week is they started to taking the draft and sending him back to units, and I was supposed to go back with the same unit he was with. It was supposed to be another unit, and then in the last minute they divided everybody up, and he went one way and I went the other. But him and I got along real good. We promised to write once in a while, and afterwards we stopped writing.
Why were you in the hospital in England?
Oh, we've been doing what they call a big exercise part, and it was actually they said it was a rehearsal for some Montgomery was taking a rehearsal for something in the desert, in North Africa, and he used everything that he's using in southern England, and all the moves and all the attack was supposed to be in the desert or North Africa, and we got through, and we're doing a lot of marching. And I'd never dropped out of a route much before. And what happened, it was raining, and I had my extra boots in my small pack, in my other pack, and I couldn't get my pack. So I had to turn these boots in, and they gave me a pair of English Army boots. The English Army boots had a toe cap on, where the Canadian boots were moccasin toe and very easy. And the English boots was just like walking on a brick, and it sort of aggravated my heels. And it's marching along, and I thought, "Geez, they're bad." And I stopped for 10 minutes, and there was always a RAP, regimental medical person coming along, a corporal or somebody later, or just an ordinary guy. And I said, "Geez, I have a look at my heels." I said, "They're all sore." So he took off my shoes, and I'd worn about the size of a quarter. I wore the skin off both heels. So I ended up with what they call bursitis of the heels, and they sent me to this camp, not the camp, but they set me on they told me to wait beside wait beside the road, and wait for some other corporal or something like that. And meanwhile, an ambulance come along, and they said, "Anybody need a ride?" I said, "Yeah, I don't need a ride." And then I got in there, and they said, "Where the hell are you going?" He said, "Well, going to the number 5 General Hospital." So I ended up in the General Hospital, and I said, I get in this ward, and they call it there's two sides of the ward. We're on one side, and there's the other side. They call that the side that belonged to the rear admiral. We said, what do you mean it belongs to the rear admiral? He said, "They all got hemorrhoids over there." So that side belongs to the rear admiral, but our side was all the lower extremities, and I was the young guy, and I said, "What the hell?" I said, "What the hell is an extremity?" He told me. I figured I knew all parts of the body, but what was extremity? I knew what the legs were and everything else. Oh, they meant the lower extremities were the legs. This particular side of the word was all people with the legs, and I had with my feet. And I wasn't allowed to leave the bed, but I used to sneak out to go to the washroom. I didn't want to use a bedpan. And they had a guy there that looked like Boris Karloff. Did you ever see Boris Karloff?
Yeah.
Well, he looked like, he sort of walked like that. He was the orderly. So I used to sneak out with my hands and knees and go to the bathroom. I opened the door, and the first thing he said, "Did you go?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Was it hard? Was it soft?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He thought I was one of the hemorrhoid cases. But I'll never forget that. Like, hard with soft. I said, No, I'm okay. It's just my feet. He said, "You're not allowed to do that. You're supposed to stay in your bed and use a bedpan." I said, "What do I need?" I said, "I want to use a bedpan. I can get out here and go to the." You had some funny rules there. Eh? Yeah. That was my big experiments in the military. And the hospital was run by. They had a complete unit from Winnipeg. They made up doctors and nurses from Winnipeg, and they called it Number 5 General Hospital. So I was like at home, being a Winnipegger. Right. And most of them people lived in Winnipeg, and chatting away with them. You had to call them sir and ma'am, all that sort of stuff.
Right, but it sounds like it was sort of a bit of a, like you say, a bit of a homecoming in England.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It took a little while, but I'll never forget this guy Boris Karloff. He just started falling around like he had that walk about, stride, a bit of a rock and all that sort of stuff. They say, "Here comes Boris." That was somebody gave him a name and it stuck. Yeah.
What do you want young people to know about D-Day and about what happened during the Second World War and about people like yourself who served? What is important, do you think, for young people to really know about what happened?
You know that I go out and give talks, eh?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, well, I deal with the young people all the time, with the school or cadets, and I have my PowerPoint, and I have a few pictures of guys who were killed in action and so on, and I also talk about D-Day, and there's one fellow helped put up the PowerPoint with me, and I got he's put a few pictures of the LCAs and little action pictures of D-Day and so on and so forth, and I'm able to describe it as I go along, and I got this little light that can, like on one side I can point the light at the screen and tell them what it's all about. It makes it a lot easier. Before I used the 4x6 cards, just like Ronald Reagan used to have, and just little notes on them and say things. That was too difficult because you sometimes forget and maybe didn't want to talk. But the other one, if it's on PowerPoint, it's easy just to point at it and let the picture tell the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Things work out better that way.
Mm-hmm. And what is your message to those people when you're talking?
Well, my message is to remember especially when I come to pictures of the soldiers, whether they're a group of soldiers or people I know were killed in action. I said, these are just ordinary guys like you see around now, but they had a different mission. They all volunteered, and they all end up in action. Some were killed in action, and some survived, and some were wounded. And I said, they talk about this. I'll say this one or two guys, and my favorite guy is my buddy, was Jimmy Keir. I said, he's only 23 when he's killed in action. I said, he's a very nice-looking guy. He's very nice. He liked to horseplay and joking around and all that sort of stuff, and a good-natured fellow. And I say, he never had the opportunity to have a family, grandchildren, or anything else. Sort of talk like that. Right. It's just he had to survive. Maybe some of the kids in his room could have been his grandkids, either here in Winnipeg or Vancouver. It doesn't matter where, but it could have been. I talk sort of like that. I ad lib,
right.
Off the cuff.
So there you have it. my conversation with Jim Parks, who, of course, was there on D-Day back in 1944. And my thanks to Jim Parks for letting me speak with him, for being so gracious with his time. And it was his idea to talk again after the phone call initially dropped. Not because I didn't want to, but because I did not want to impose on him. I left him a message. I said, thank you very much. You were so generous with your time. He on the first call, he gave me 10 more minutes than what we had sort of scheduled. And for him to come back to me and say, no, I want to keep talking, was just an incredible honor to me, that he was trusting me with this and letting me hear his stories and letting me share them with all of you. It was an incredible privilege. We've done 132 now of these shows, and this one was really, out of all of them, I'm proud of all of them. Let me say that. And, with no disrespect to any of the other 131 shows, this one, it really does stand out in my mind as just an amazing opportunity and something that I feel privileged to have had the opportunity to do. And hopefully you all enjoyed hearing Jim Parks's history and his story. And again, he is featured in the documentary D-Day in 14 Stories, which is airing Saturday, June the 8th on Global. Check your local listings for airtime in your area. And for our friends outside of Canada, just Google up D-Day in 14 Stories. You can find out about distribution where you are. So again, my thanks to Jim Parks and the entire team that helped set this up. Just an absolute privilege and an honor for me to have a chance to speak with him. Hopefully everybody over there at Juno Beach and all the veterans from all the countries who are heading back there to the coast have a good time, and that the commemorations go off well. It's good weather, all that stuff, and that everything goes off as planned on Thursday. If you enjoyed this episode or you have any questions about it, please feel free to get in touch at historyslam@gmail.com, or just about the show in general. You can also find me on Twitter at Dr. Shawnee Fever, and please do go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, subscribe if you have not yet. Give us some ratings and comments, all that good stuff that helps keep the show going. You can also head over to Activehistory.ca for some more features articles that we have been writing about. So there's been a couple stories about the Second World War recently, and particularly with D-Day. So do check those out. And with that, we'll be back with you in a couple weeks with another new episode. But until then, if you're out and you see Enrico Palazzo, please say hi for me.
Thanks for listening to the History Slam podcast. Be sure to check out Active History for more features, articles, and be sure to subscribe on iTunes.